Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. Happy Women's History Month, and I'm Gwen Young, the CEO of WBC. And today I'm excited to hear from Sherry Deutschmann, the CEO and founder of BrainTrust and LetterLogic, and an award-winning author of Lunch with Lucy, Maximize Profits by Investing in Your People. And I'm joined today by my fabulous co-host and WBC champion, Linda Peek-Schacht, who's an author, executive coach, and one of our key leaders across the community. So for those of you who don't know, WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 80 organizations focused on driving equity, DEI, and women's leadership across business, and hundreds of business leaders building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. As well, WBC lives its commitment to DEI, and members of our staff, our board of directors, and WBC champions include more than 34% people of color, and every single one of our 4 action initiatives has DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat for our action initiatives, which are focused on women CEOs in the C-suite, women on board, women investors and entrepreneurs, and women in STEM. And it is through these action initiatives that we aim to accelerate change. And also join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. So each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving corporate purpose across the business landscape. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Linda to introduce our speaker and begin our conversation.
Well, thank you, Gwen. I am so excited today to be able to have a conversation with Sherry Deutschmann, my friend, who is a serial entrepreneur, author, and passionate advocate for women-owned businesses. She's the founder and CEO of LetterLogic, a company she grew to $40 million and sold in 2016. It was named to the Inc. 5000 fastest growing privately held businesses 10 consecutive years. She's been featured in the New York Times, Forbes, Inc., and Fast Company, and honored by President Barack Obama as a White House champion for change. In 2019, she founded BrainTrust, a company dedicated to helping women entrepreneurs grow their businesses. Her mantra for BrainTrust, women faster, further together, is simpatico with all we do here at the WBC. So Sherry, welcome, and let's get started.
Thank you. It's just a joy to be with you today, Linda.
Thank you. Well, first, let's start at the beginning. Your journey to becoming a wildly successful entrepreneur. You're a single mother living in North Carolina, and you decide to move to Nashville for a very specific reason. Tell us about those early years.
Well, that's embarrassing, but I moved to Nashville because I thought I was going to be a star. I was a singer, I thought, until I heard some real talent in Nashville. I actually came out first and was on a show called You Can Be a Star, which was kind of like the precursor to The Voice and American Idol. And I came in 3rd place on a show that had 3 contestants. So I came in last place and still thought I had the goods, and moved to Nashville with no money, no education, no skills, no nothing, just my daughter and me trying to make a living. And until I moved here, the only jobs that I'd had were in cleaning. So I had a route where I cleaned gas station bathrooms, which is a pretty nasty job.
That's really amazing. So you came in and you started working in sales, and you wound up as a successful sales executive, but in a company and with a boss who was the catalyst for you starting your own company. What was that aha moment, and how did it shape your philosophy of empathetic leadership?
Well, I was had a background that was uniquely suited for sales, in that I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, learning how to knock on doors. And so when I moved to Nashville and decided I had to get a real job, that I wasn't going to make it as a star, I worked in a series of jobs that were around healthcare, and I became vice president of sales for a company in the healthcare revenue cycle space. But our service was so poor that I would sell a new account and we would lose an account, and I would sell 2 accounts and lose. And I just couldn't affect change. And so it seemed like my boss wasn't really that concerned. The company was making money. And so I set out for myself to figure out why we kept making these mistakes. And our problems were mostly simple human error. It was, carelessness. And it occurred to me that the reason my coworkers didn't care is because nobody cared about them. And I had read the book Nuts from Herb Kelleher, the guy who started Southwest Airlines, with his belief that if he just took great care of the flight attendants and the pilots and the baggage handlers, that they would be happy at work, and then the passengers would be happy at work, happy, being on a Southwest plane. And that worked out for him. And so I literally ran to my boss and said, "Oh my gosh, I've got this thing figured out. If we can just take better care of our employees, there will be better morale and our results would be better." And Linda, he literally reached across the table and patted my hand and said, "Sherry, you don't know anything about business. Why don't you just go sell something?" Just so condescendingly. And I was crushed, angry, hurt. But I took his advice, and I quit working for him that day. And I went and sold something that day, but it was for my company. I started a company in my basement competing with him. And I just, I thought about how little attention he gave me and how little he cared for me when I was the rainmaker. I was the one bringing in all the revenue, and how much less cared for did my coworkers who were, running machines, how much less cared for were they? And what would happen if suddenly they knew that they mattered, that they had a voice, that they were well paid? And so I created a company culture around that.
Yeah, you give thanks to all the employees of LetterLogic in your book. You list every one of them, and they clearly responded to your philosophy and, in fact, adapted it themselves of empathetic leadership. They basically were a family, and in part because of Lunch with Lucy, the title of your book. So, what was Lunch with Lucy?
Lunch with Lucy was a practice where every Wednesday I wasn't Sherry, the CEO. On Wednesdays, I just became Lucy, a coworker. And I liked alliteration, so LetterLogic, Lunch, Lucy, all went together. And on Wednesdays, any of the employees could ask me out, and they would choose who would go with us to lunch, and they would choose the restaurant. And we would go to lunch and talk about them. And so that I could see the world from their lens, which is what empathy is all about, really, putting yourself in their shoes. I'd already taken care of the basics. I started this company out with the belief that if I put them first, that would take care of everything. In fact, I met with prospective clients who were big healthcare systems, and I looked them right in the eye and said, "I don't believe the customer comes first. My employees come first. And let me tell you how I'm going to do that." And so then I would share with him how we paid a real fair living wage, how we paid 100% of the medical, dental, disability, and life insurance, how we let them bring their kids and their pets to work, how we helped them all buy their first home with a gift toward the down payment or closing costs, and how every month I took 10% of the profit, no matter what it was, and split it evenly so that our CFO got exactly the same dollar amount our janitor got. And that made them care about each other. And so they worked to help each other succeed in their jobs, which was what made our company so profitable. But that Lunch with Lucy practice of having lunch with these people was the most important time I spent with my employees.
Well, I love the example you give of where you would sit when you took them to lunch and why you did that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I sat with my back to the door. Now, generally, I'm more comfortable facing the door. But I realized that when I did that, we were interrupted by people in the community who saw me and wanted to speak. And before, just 15 minutes into it, the lunch would be about me. It wouldn't be about this other person. And so I chose the least prominent seat at the table, so that they were the focal point and we could talk about them.
That's great. I had to question as I was reading the book, have other companies adopted what you've done? And is that part of what you're doing with BrainTrust? Tell us now, after you sold the business, why and how you decided to start BrainTrust, and tell us about its successes.
Well, quite a few companies have taken up my profit sharing model, which involves total transparency and sharing your financials with your employees, giving them the P&L and letting them understand how the company makes money, and then every month giving 10% back to them. But I started BrainTrust because I was a member of EO, which is the Entrepreneurs Organization, and WPO, the Women's Presidents Organization, both of which are peer learning groups for entrepreneurs. But you can't join until you get to $1 million in revenue. And less than 2% of women ever get to $1 million in revenue. Only 7% of men ever get there. And so that leaves this huge group of people who need other people to help them grow their businesses. And I did it because I wanted more women to feel what I felt. It wasn't just, reaching financial independence and, frankly, real wealth, but it was the influence that came from the success of a business. Like that framed picture behind me, a letter, that's my letter from Barack Obama naming me a White House champion of change. And that was right after I'd addressed Congress on why the minimum wage should be increased. And that didn't come about for any reason other than I had a successful business that gave me a platform, that gave me a megaphone, really. And I want more women to experience that. And they're not going to experience that unless their businesses are successful. I tell them often, you can't do good until you're doing well. So let's focus on having your business do well, and then you can do more good in the world. So BrainTrust is a peer learning organization for women entrepreneurs. We now have about 200 members in Nashville, and we are close to choosing Charlotte, North Carolina as our next city. So if you're in Charlotte, give me a call, because our members grew their revenue last year by over 227%. We have had 50 of the women in Nashville. When you think about only 2% of women ever getting to $1 million, our membership in Nashville is almost 50 women who are from $1 million to 30 million.
That is amazing.
It is working.
Well, tell us about this concept of the vault and the peer-to-peer learning, and what you bring, because you're so inspiring, what you bring to each of these vaults.
Well, I don't bring anything to them except teaching them the process, because they're on their own. They don't spend much time with me. In fact, I think there's some members now who I haven't even met, and I probably won't meet for a while. But we call each group of 7 women a vault, because a vault is a place that holds great value, and it's also a safe place for your valuables. And so women can come in and share their biggest problems and their biggest opportunities in full confidence, and then not through advice given, but through experience sharing, leaning into our lived experiences, help one another overcome the challenges and make better choices moving forward. And the process absolutely works.
That's great. Well, you're involved in another thing that's really working, and that is the Show Her the Money film. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's so exciting. This is a documentary about the plight of women getting funded. So in the U.S., women get less than 2% of venture capital. And this is so critical, even though the data shows that we produce a much greater ROI for investors. Boston Consulting Group has done an incredible study about how we are a much better bet, and yet still we can't get investors to fund our companies. And so this film, I'm an associate producer, which basically means I wrote a check, but it follows the path of 5 different entrepreneurs and how they got funded and the struggles they're still experiencing, just to wake everybody's eyes up to the fact that women are good bets, and women should be investing in women. and making you realize you don't have to be an accredited investor to be able to help some of these women. Angel funding is great. The friends and family round, there's a great way for you to get involved so you can make money as you're helping these women grow their businesses.
Is there an example in the film or an example from BrainTrust that you can share with us about a successful women-owned business?
There are dozens. One that I can think of right now, which is not one of those that's seeking investment, is a woman who came to us just 2 years ago. She has three children, supporting them on $20 an hour. And I encouraged her to quit her job and start her own business. And so now she's doing over $30,000 a month. And that's just less than 2 years ago. So it's just really making women see what attributes and skills they have and making them believe more in themselves.
That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about one of the things that you mentioned in the book. You mentioned that you were raised in a Jehovah's Witness household and learned rejection early. How do you advise people to deal with rejection?
Oh, goodness. It's just every no is one step closer to the yes that you need. And I believe also that I've many times I've been rejected, and now I can look back and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that didn't work out. I'm so glad they said no. And, even when it comes to investors, I said no to early investors who would not have allowed me to create the culture that I did, which is what leads me to be sitting here in front of you. So that those no's enabled me to say yes to just the perfect investor.
Well, that's great. One of the things that you did early on as well was to identify what wasn't working. And as you say, you spent 2 or 3 days trying to figure out what you could do to address a problem that you saw in the industry. Can you talk about that process? Because I found it fascinating that that's the way you decided to start your business.
Yeah, well, I actually took my business plan to a group of men here in town who looked at it and said, there's nothing here. The only thing you've got is you and the fact that you know the industry. So you've got to come up with something that will get you some attention. And so I literally did not sleep for 3 days thinking about what problem could I solve in the hospitals. And it was a simple problem. Hospitals have a ton of return mail. So for every 1,000 bills they send out to patients, 100 of them come back as undeliverable. And then they turn it over to collection agency, and that hurts everybody all the way around. So I just processed the addresses of our hospital clients before I printed and mailed the bill so that I could find a good address. And I told the hospitals, I will guarantee delivery or your money back. And that's really what got us started, that one unique idea that opened the door. And then it transitioned probably by year 2, where 85% of our sales were culture sales, where hospitals were choosing us because of our empathetic culture, and not because and we were the most expensive in the nation, but they still chose us because they believed in our culture.
Well, that leads me to one of my last 2 questions. And the first one is, what words of advice do you have to someone who wants to become an empathetic leader?
To literally put yourself in the shoes of the person, not literally put their shoes on, but visualize yourself living in their circumstances, living on the pay that you give them. How would your life change if you were paid what you pay your people? And if you lived where they live? And if your kids went to school where their kids go to school? And how does that change your perspective on how they should be treated? And nothing bad can come from you developing empathy and being able to see the world through the lens of another person. There's only good that can come from that.
But that makes me want to stop right here, but I have one more question.
Okay.
That final bit of advice that you have for women business owners. You have helped so many. You are successful yourself. What advice do you give them to take with them every day?
You don't know what you don't know. But if you surround yourself with other people who are on the same path building a business, And like in our groups of the vaults, somebody in that group knows what you need to know, knows what you don't know. So learning from peers, if you don't have a group, find a group of other business women owners who can help you navigate, because they can see the blind spots that you can't see.
Women helping women. That is terrific. And it's what we're trying to do here at WBC. Thank you so much, Sherry Deutschmann, author of Lunch with Lucy. I encourage everyone, whether you're a business owner or not, to get the book because it will inspire you on a different way, not only to run your business, but to live your life. Thank you, Sherry, for being with us.
Thank you, Linda.
That's all we have time for today. And we invite you to go to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about WBC's initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and the boardroom, to address underrepresentation of women in STEM and the available capital for women, and to advance a pipeline of women leaders to bring gender and pay equity and diversity, equity, and inclusion to the business landscape. And join us next week and keep up to date with us and our movement for gender equity in business and the latest issues by following us on social media at WB Collaborative on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you again, Sherry.